Dr. Kim Ji-won stared at her computer screen for the 10th time that night. The image showed something that couldn't possibly be there, but it was, in the soil sample from Mars, brought back by the latest space mission. She saw shapes that looked just like the remains of tiny living things. The laboratory at the Korean Space Research Institute was quiet at this late hour. Most people had gone home, but Ji-won couldn't leave. Not when she might have just made the biggest discovery in human history. She picked up her coffee cup and found it empty again. The clock on the wall showed 11:30 p.m., but she barely noticed the time. Her eyes kept going back to those strange shapes in the Mars soil sample. "This can't be right," she said to herself, adjusting her glasses. But every test she ran showed the same thing. The tiny structures in the soil looked exactly like bacterial fossils, similar to the very old ones found on Earth, but they were different in important ways. Ji-won reached for her phone and called the one person she knew would understand. After 3 rings, a sleepy voice answered. "Do-hyun, I need you to come to the lab right now," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I found something in the Mars samples." Dr. Park Do-hyun arrived 20 minutes later, his coat thrown hastily over his shoulders. His usually neat hair was messy, but his eyes were alert as he looked through the microscope. "Show me everything," he said. Ji-won pulled up all her test results on the big screen. "Look at the structure," she said, pointing to the image. "It's similar to Earth's ancient bacteria, but the cell walls are different. They're built to withstand much harsher conditions." Do-hyun leaned closer to the screen. "These couldn't have formed naturally," he said after a long pause. "These were made by living things." "That's not all," Ji-won said, switching to another image. "I found traces of minerals around them that only form in liquid water. But these minerals were deep in the sample, not on the surface." Do-hyun sat down heavily in a chair. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Ji-won nodded, her heart beating fast. "These bacteria didn't live on Mars's surface. They lived underground, where liquid water could exist." "If you're right," Do-hyun said slowly, "this changes everything we know about Mars, about life in the universe." Ji-won pulled up more images on her computer. "Look at how many there are. This wasn't just a few bacteria. This was an entire ecosystem." They worked through the night, running more tests, checking and double-checking their results. As the sun rose over Seoul, casting long shadows through the laboratory windows, they knew they had found something extraordinary. "We need to tell the director," Do-hyun said, rubbing his tired eyes. Ji-won nodded, but fear mixed with her excitement. She knew what would happen next. Other scientists would question their discovery. They would need proof, lots of it. "Before we go public," she said, "we need to be completely sure. We need to understand exactly what we're looking at." Do-hyun smiled. "Well, you've already missed 1 night of sleep. Want to miss a few more?" Ji-won laughed, feeling more alive than she had in years. "For this, I'd miss a whole year of sleep." As they prepared their initial report, neither of them knew that this discovery would lead them on an adventure beyond anything they had imagined. The fossils in that small sample of Mars soil were just the beginning. They were about to uncover a story that had been waiting millions of years to be told, a story that would change humanity's understanding of life itself. 2 weeks after their initial discovery, Ji-won and Do-hyun sat in their shared office, surrounded by research papers and data charts. The excitement of their finding had given way to intense study and careful analysis. They knew they needed a strong theory to explain what they had found. "Look at these mineral patterns again," Ji-won said, pointing to a detailed scan. "They only form when water is present for a very long time. Not just days or years, but millions of years." Do-hyun nodded, typing notes into his computer. "And the depth of the sample suggests these bacteria lived far below the surface." "Exactly," Ji-won said, standing up to draw on the whiteboard. She drew a simple diagram of Mars, then added layers beneath its surface. What if Mars had huge underground water reserves, like giant underground lakes, protected by layers of rock and ice. Do-hyun added, getting excited. The surface of Mars might have been too harsh for life, but underground, the conditions would have been perfect. Jae-won finished. She drew more details on her diagram. The rock layers would protect the water from Mars' radiation. The ice would prevent it from evaporating, and the planet's core would keep it warm enough to stay liquid. They worked late into the evening, building their theory piece by piece. Jae-won found more evidence in the bacterial fossils themselves. Their cell structures were different from Earth bacteria in ways that made perfect sense for underground life. These thick cell walls, she explained, showing Do-hyun a detailed image. They're built to handle high pressure, exactly what you'd need to live deep underground. And look at these structures, Do-hyun said, pointing to small parts inside the fossilized cells. They're similar to what Earth bacteria use to get energy from minerals. These bacteria could have lived without sunlight. As their theory grew stronger, they decided to present it to the Institute's director. They prepared their presentation carefully, knowing how incredible their claims would sound. The next morning, they stood before Director Yoon and several senior scientists. Jae-won took a deep breath and began explaining their theory. We believe Mars once had a complex ecosystem centered around underground water reserves, she said, showing their carefully prepared slides. These weren't just small pockets of water. They were vast networks of underground lakes and streams. Do-hyun continued. The bacteria we found show signs of being part of a larger community. They didn't just survive. They thrived. Some produced energy from minerals, while others might have fed on the waste products of the first group. The room was silent as they finished their presentation. Director Yoon leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious. This is remarkable, he said finally. But you understand what you're suggesting. This would mean completely changing how we think about Mars's history, about the possibility of life in our solar system. We know it sounds incredible, Jae-won said, but the evidence supports our theory. Every new test we run makes it stronger. And if we're right, Do-hyun added, it means we need to completely change how we search for life on other planets. We've been looking in the wrong places. Director Yoon stood up slowly. Write up your full theory. Include every piece of evidence, every test result. We'll need to present this to the international scientific community. As they left the meeting, Jae-won and Do-hyun felt both relieved and nervous. They had taken the first step, but they knew the real challenge was just beginning. Soon, scientists around the world would examine their theory, looking for any weakness or flaw. Ready for what comes next? Do-hyun asked as they walked back to their lab. Jae-won smiled, thinking about the journey ahead. Ready or not, we have to follow where this leads. We might be about to rewrite the history of our solar system. The large conference room at the International Space Science Meeting in Tokyo was packed. Scientists from around the world had come to hear about the controversial Mars discovery. Jae-won stood at the podium, finishing her presentation about their theory of ancient Martian life. These bacterial fossils show clear signs of biological origin, she said, pointing to the large screen behind her. The evidence suggests a complex underground ecosystem that existed for millions of years. As soon as she finished speaking, Dr. Lee Sang-min stood up. He was a famous scientist known for his work on Mars geology, and his face showed clear doubt. Dr. Kim, he said, his voice firm, what you're suggesting is impossible. These structures you found can be explained by simple chemical reactions. They're not fossils. Jae-won had expected this. She clicked to her next slide, showing detailed chemical analysis. The molecular patterns here can only be created by living organisms. We've run every possible test. But your samples are too small, another scientist called out. You can't make such big claims from such little evidence. Do-hyun, sitting in the front row, raised his hand to speak. We've analyzed over 100 samples, all showing the same patterns. The statistical probability of this happening by chance is extremely low. The debate grew more intense. Some scientists supported their theory, but many others sided with Sangmin. The room filled with loud discussions and arguments. Even if these are fossils, Sangmin said, standing again, your theory about underground water systems is pure speculation. Where is your proof? Jai-Wan took a deep breath. The mineral formations in our samples can only form in liquid water. And the depth of these samples suggests. Sangmin interrupted. Science isn't built on suggestions, Dr. Kim. It's built on solid evidence. After the presentation, Jae-won and Do-hyun sat in a quiet corner of the conference center. They felt discouraged but not defeated. We knew this would happen, Do-hyun said, offering Jae-won a cup of coffee. Big discoveries always face opposition at first. Jae-won nodded, thinking about all the historical examples. Remember when people first suggested continents could move? Everyone thought that was impossible too. Their conversation was interrupted by a young scientist who approached their table. Dr. Kim. Dr. Park, she said, I'm Dr. Choi Han-nul. I believe your theory might be correct, and I think I can help prove it. They looked up with interest as Han-nul pulled out her tablet. I've been developing a new scanning technology, she explained. It can detect water traces deep underground, even if they're millions of years old. Jae-won and Do-hyun exchanged excited looks. This could be exactly what they needed. If we could scan Mars with this technology, Han-nul continued, we might find evidence of these ancient water systems you're talking about. As they discussed the possibilities, they noticed Sangmin watching them from across the room. His expression was stern, but there was something else in his eyes. Worry, perhaps, that they might actually prove their theory correct. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave Tokyo, Jae-won received an email from the Korean Space Research Institute. The director wanted to meet with them immediately upon their return. What do you think it means? Do-hyun asked. Jae-won smiled, feeling hopeful for the first time since the difficult presentation. It means we're not done yet. Not by a long shot. They had faced strong opposition, but they had also found a new ally. With Han-nul's technology, they might finally be able to prove what they believed, that Mars had once been home to a vast underground world of life. 1 month after the Tokyo conference, Jae-won stood in a large meeting room at the Korean Space Research Institute. Before her sat representatives from space agencies around the world. The Institute's director had called this meeting to discuss something unprecedented, a new mission to Mars. Dr. Kim's theory about underground life on Mars needs to be proven or disproven, the director said. We propose a joint mission to drill deep beneath Mars' surface. Han-nul stepped forward to present her scanning technology. She had spent the past month improving it with help from Jae-won and Do-hyun. This scanner can detect water traces up to 2 kilometers underground, she explained. It's exactly what we need for this mission. The room filled with excited murmurs. Even Dr. Lee Sangmin, sitting in the back, leaned forward with interest. The cost will be high, someone pointed out, and the technical challenges are enormous. That's why we need international cooperation, Do-hyun responded. No single country can do this alone. To everyone's surprise, Sangmin stood up. I still have doubts about Dr. Kim's theory, he said, but this mission could provide valuable data either way. I support it. The next 6 months passed in a blur of preparation. The mission would send a specially designed drilling probe to Mars, carrying Han-nul's scanner and other advanced instruments. Jae-won, Do-hyun, and Han-nul would control the operation from Earth. As the launch date approached, Jae-won couldn't sleep. She stood at her apartment window one night, looking at the stars. Mars was visible as a small red dot. We're coming to learn your secrets, she whispered. The morning of the launch arrived clear and cold. The spacecraft sat on the launch pad, ready for its journey. Jae-won, Do-hyun, and Han-nul watched from the control room as the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Jae-won held her breath. Everything they had worked for came down to this moment. 7, 6, 5. Do-hyun reached over and squeezed her hand. They had become more than colleagues through this journey. 4, 3, 2. Hanul crossed her fingers, her eyes fixed on the screens showing the rocket. 1. Liftoff. The rocket rose from the launch pad in a burst of flame and smoke. Everyone in the control room cheered as it climbed higher and higher, carrying their hopes and dreams toward Mars. First stage separation successful, a technician announced. Second stage ignition confirmed. Minutes later, the spacecraft was safely in orbit, ready to begin its long journey to Mars. It would take 6 months to reach its destination. Now comes the hard part, Do-hyun said as they celebrated that evening. The waiting. We'll use the time well, Hae-Nul said. I want to run more tests on the scanner, make sure it's perfect. Jae-won nodded, looking at the preliminary data from the spacecraft. Everything was working perfectly so far. In 6 months, they would either prove their theory about life on Mars or show that they had been wrong all along. That night, as she drove home, Jae-won thought about how far they had come. From a late-night discovery in her lab to an international space mission, it seemed almost unreal. Her phone buzzed with a message from Do-hyun. Get some rest. The real adventure is just beginning. She smiled, knowing he was right. Soon, they would drill deeper into Mars than anyone had ever gone before. What they might find there could change everything humans thought they knew about life in the universe. 6 months after the launch, the drilling probe successfully landed on Mars. The control room at the Korean Space Research Institute was filled with tension as Jae-won, Do-hyun, and Hae-Nul prepared to begin their exploration. Probe systems are all working perfectly, Hae-Nul reported, checking the readings on her screen. The scanner is ready. Jae-won nodded, her hands steady on the controls. Beginning the drilling sequence now. They watched as the probe's drill bit began to pierce the Martian surface. The special drill, designed to work in Mars' low gravity, moved smoothly through the red soil. First layer complete, Do-hyun announced. Moving deeper. Hour after hour, they guided the drill deeper into Mars. Hae-Nul's scanner sent back data about each layer they passed through. The readings appeared on their screens in colorful patterns that told the story of Mars' past. Look at these mineral deposits, Jae-won said, pointing to her screen. They're exactly what we predicted we'd find if there had been water here. Suddenly, Hae-Nul sat up straight in her chair. Wait, the scanner is showing something different. About 500 meters ahead. They all leaned forward, studying the readings. The pattern was unlike anything they had seen before. It looks like a cave system, Do-hyun said in amazement. Jae-won's heart beat faster. Can we get the drill there? Yes, Hae-Nul replied, already adjusting their course. But we'll need to be very careful. The rock structure is delicate. They worked slowly and carefully, guiding the drill toward the cave system. When they finally broke through, the probe's cameras showed them something extraordinary. It's beautiful, Jae-won whispered. The cave walls sparkled with mineral crystals, but more importantly, they could see clear signs that water had once flowed through these caves. The walls were smooth and curved, shaped by millions of years of water movement. Hae-Nul's scanner revealed more surprises. There are organic compounds in the cave walls, she announced, her voice shaking with excitement. And they're preserved perfectly in the crystal formations. We need to take samples, Do-hyun said. Can the probe reach that section of the wall? They carefully maneuvered the probe's sampling arm. As they worked, Dr. Lee Sang-min entered the control room. He had been following their progress from his own laboratory. May I? He asked, gesturing to an empty chair. When Jae-won nodded, he sat down to watch. The sampling arm extended, carefully scraping a small amount of material from the cave wall. The probe's instruments began analyzing it immediately. The organic material, Hae-Nul said, staring at the results. It's not random. These are organized structures, just like in our first samples. Even Sang-min leaned forward with interest. The preservation is remarkable, he admitted. These crystals protected the organic matter from radiation and decay. As they collected more samples, they discovered that the cave system was vast, stretching for kilometers in every direction. It was an entire underground world, perfectly preserved from Mars's ancient past. "We did it," Jai-1 said quietly. "We found what we were looking for." Do-hyun touched her shoulder gently. "We found more than that. We found proof that Mars once had a whole world of life hidden beneath its surface." Hanul was already planning their next moves. "We need to map the entire cave system. There could be more preserved samples, maybe even better ones." As they worked late into the night, none of them could stop smiling. They had just made one of the most important discoveries in human history, and they knew that this was only the beginning. After 2 weeks of exploring the Martian caves, the team made their biggest discovery yet. The probe's sensors detected an unusual chamber sealed off from the main cave system. "The readings are off the charts," Hanul said, studying her scanner data. "This chamber has been completely sealed for millions of years. No radiation, no contamination." Jai-1 and Do-hyun exchanged excited looks. A sealed chamber could have preserved evidence of life perfectly. "Can we get the probe in there without damaging anything?" Jai-1 asked. Hanul nodded. "I think so. The rock is soft enough to drill through carefully." They worked slowly, drilling a small entrance into the chamber. Dr. Lee Sang-min joined them again, bringing coffee for everyone. He had been spending more time in their control room lately, his initial skepticism giving way to genuine interest. When the probe's camera finally entered the chamber, everyone gasped. The walls were lined with clear layers of sediment, like pages in a history book, and in those layers they could see countless tiny shapes. "Those are definitely fossils," Do-hyun said, his voice filled with awe. "And they're everywhere." The probe's instruments confirmed what their eyes told them. The chamber contained thousands of perfectly preserved microfossils. But that wasn't all. "Look at this," Hanul said, pointing to her chemical analysis. "These mineral deposits, they could only have been made by living organisms. It's like finding a chemical signature of ancient life." Sang-min leaned forward, studying the data carefully. After a long moment, he spoke. "The evidence is conclusive," he said quietly. "You were right all along. Mars didn't just have water, it had life." Jai-1 felt tears in her eyes. After all their work, all the doubt they had faced, they finally had proof that couldn't be questioned. The probe's analysis revealed that the fossils were of many different types of organisms. Some were simple bacteria, while others showed more complex structures. They had found an entire ecosystem, preserved like insects in amber. "These organisms lived together," Do-hyun explained as they studied the patterns. "Some produced energy from minerals, others fed on those first organisms, and still others helped break down the waste. It was a complete food web. Just like modern ecosystems on Earth," Jai-1 added. "But these evolved completely independently on Mars." They worked through the night, gathering more data and samples. News of their discovery spread quickly. Soon, scientists from around the world were calling, asking to see their findings. The next morning, exhausted but happy, the team prepared for a global press conference. Before they went in, Sang-min stopped them. "I owe you an apology," he said to Jai-1. "I was too quick to dismiss your theory. You've made the most important scientific discovery in human history." Jai-1 smiled. "The important thing is that we found the truth, and now we can learn from it." As they walked into the press conference, Hanul checked her phone one last time. "The images are already all over the internet," she said. "People are calling it the discovery of the century." "The century?" Do-hyun laughed. "I think this might be the discovery of all time." Jai-1 looked at her team, her friends now, and felt proud. Together, they had proven that Earth wasn't the only planet to create life. Mars had once been a living world, with its own unique story to tell. And they were the ones who had finally found that story. hidden deep beneath the red planet's surface. 1 month after announcing their discovery, Ji-1 sat in her office, reviewing the latest analysis results. Scientists worldwide were studying the data from the Mars chamber, and each day brought new insights about how life had evolved on another world. Dr. Lee Sang-min knocked on her door, carrying a thick folder of reports. He had become one of their strongest supporters, helping them explain their findings to other scientists. "The dating results are back," he said, placing the folder on her desk. "The fossils are much older than we thought. Mars had life for at least 2 billion years longer than we believed possible." Ji-1 looked at the numbers in amazement. This means life on Mars survived long after the surface became uninhabitable. Do-hyun and Hae-nul joined them, bringing more surprising news. Hae-nul's scanner had mapped a huge network of underground chambers spreading across half of Mars' northern hemisphere. These weren't just isolated communities, Do-hyun explained, showing them the maps. This was a planet-wide ecosystem living beneath the surface. The implications of their discovery grew bigger each day. If life could survive for so long underground on Mars, it might exist in similar places throughout the universe. "We need to change how we search for life on other worlds," Hae-nul said. "We've been focusing too much on surface conditions. Life finds a way to survive in the most unexpected places." Their research center became very busy. Scientists came from many countries to study their findings. Every day, they learned more about how Martian life had adapted to survive underground. "Look at this," Ji-1 said one evening, showing her colleagues a new analysis. "These organisms changed over time. They evolved to need less and less water as Mars dried up. They were fighting to survive," Sang-min said softly, "even as their world changed around them." The public was fascinated by their discoveries. Ji-1 and her team received thousands of messages from people around the world. Many were from young students who said they wanted to become scientists after learning about Mars' underground life. One afternoon, while they were studying new samples, Hae-nul made another important discovery. "These organisms didn't just survive," she said excitedly. "They helped each other. Different species worked together to stay alive in the harsh conditions. Just like we need to work together to explore space," Do-hyun added, smiling at his colleagues who had become like family. The team worked late that night, discussing what their discovery meant for humanity. They knew they had changed how people thought about life in the universe forever. "Mars isn't just a dead planet anymore," Ji-1 said, looking at the red planet through their laboratory window. "It's a world with a story to tell, a story of life that refused to die, that found new ways to survive." Sang-min nodded in agreement, "And we've only read the first chapter of that story. There's so much more to learn." As they prepared for their next phase of research, none of them could have imagined how their discovery would change the future. Space agencies around the world began planning new missions to search for underground life on other worlds. The way humans thought about life in the universe had changed forever. That night, before leaving the lab, Ji-1 took one last look at the Mars images on her screen. Somewhere deep beneath that red surface, life had fought to survive for billions of years. And now, thanks to their work, its story would finally be told. 1 year after their groundbreaking discovery, Ji-1 stood at a podium in Stockholm, Sweden. She was about to accept the Nobel Prize in Science, along with Do-hyun and Hae-nul. Dr. Lee Sang-min sat in the front row, smiling proudly at his former opponents who had become close friends. "The story of life on Mars teaches us an important lesson," Ji-1 said in her speech. "Life is more resilient than we ever imagined. It finds ways to survive in the most challenging conditions." The discovery had changed space exploration forever. Space agencies around the world were now working together on new missions to search for underground life on other planets and moons. The Korean Space Research Institute had become a leader in this new age of exploration. Back in their laboratory after the ceremony, the team reviewed plans for their next mission. They were designing new probes to explore the underground oceans of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. A year ago, people would have said this was impossible, Hae-nul said, looking at the complex designs on her screen. Now they're asking when we can launch. Do-hyun nodded, adjusting some calculations. That's because we proved that life doesn't need perfect conditions to survive. It just needs a chance. Sang-min, who now led the Institute's new Department of Extraterrestrial Biology, joined them with exciting news. The International Space Council has approved our proposal, he announced. We're getting funding for 10 new missions to search for underground life in our solar system. Jae-won looked around at her team, remembering how their journey had started with a single unusual sample in her microscope. Now they were preparing to search for life throughout the solar system. Our discovery did more than prove life existed on Mars, she said. It gave people hope. Hope that we're not alone in the universe. That evening, they hosted a special event at the Institute. Young students from around the world had been invited to learn about their work. The children's eyes were full of wonder as they looked at images from the Martian caves. Will we find life on other planets too? One young girl asked Jae-won. I believe we will, Jae-won answered. And maybe one day he'll be part of the team that finds it. Later that night, the team gathered on the Institute's roof to look at the stars. Mars shone brightly in the sky, no longer just a red dot, but a world with a rich history of life. What do you think is still waiting to be discovered up there? Hae-Newell asked, looking at the countless stars. That's the most exciting part, Do-hyun replied. We've only just begun to look. As they stood there together, Jae-won thought about how far they had come. Their discovery had started a new chapter in human history. People now looked at the night sky differently, knowing that life could exist in places they had never considered before. Ready for our next adventure? She asked her friends. They all nodded, knowing that their work had only just begun. The story of life on Mars had changed everything, and now they were ready to search for new stories among the stars. The red planet continued to shine in the night sky, a constant reminder that sometimes the greatest discoveries come when we look in unexpected places, and that the universe still holds countless mysteries waiting to be solved.